I overheard my family plotted to take my assets, and what I did next left them in tears. I'm 65 years old now, living in a modest suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of what you might call a medium-sized city. Nothing fancy, but it's home. I ran a small grocery store, the kind of place where you know your regular customers by name and their preferred brands of coffee. It wasn't glamorous work, but it put food on the table and helped me raise my family. A few years back, I sold the store and retired with what I'd call a comfortable nest egg. Not wealthy by any means, but enough to live on peacefully in my golden years. Life was relatively straightforward until last year when I got the diagnosis that would change everything: Alzheimer's disease. The doctors started me on medication right away to slow the progression. My children, 2 sons and a daughter along with my brother, seemed incredibly supportive at first. They'd remind me to take my medications, check in regularly, help out around the house. We had what I thought was an unbreakable bond. Looking back now, I realize how naive that assumption was. Everything changed about a week ago. I'd invited the family over for what I thought would be a nice evening together, just a casual dinner with my kids, their families, and a few close relatives. The kind of gathering where you catch up on how the grandkids are doing in school, share news about work, and plan for upcoming holidays. I spent most of the evening in my favorite recliner in the living room, content to listen more than talk, watching my family interact. When I returned from my walk, I noticed something odd. All the voices had moved to the kitchen, and there was an urgent, hushed quality to them that made me pause at the front door. I heard my name mentioned more than once. Something in their tone made me hesitate to announce myself. Instead, I eased the door open just enough to hear clearly, and what I heard next would change everything. My eldest son's voice cut through first. "We should move him into a place that can handle all his needs, the sooner the better. That way, we can manage things without him interfering." The words hit me like a physical blow, but what came next was even worse. My daughter, who I'd always thought of as my most compassionate child, spoke in a voice so cold I barely recognized it. "He'll just be a burden eventually, and we might as well make sure the inheritance is settled. Could we enhance the dose of that drug to make his disease worse? Then we could take him to the nursing house as soon as possible." My brother, who I'd trusted implicitly all my life, chimed in with, "Exactly. We can't afford to wait until he's too far gone to make rational decisions. Let's sort out the will and the finances now." As I stood there, hidden from view, the truth hit me like a sledgehammer. The medication they'd been so diligently helping me with, they'd been manipulating the dosage to worsen my condition. They weren't looking out for my welfare. They were accelerating my decline to gain control of my assets sooner. The casual cruelty of their plotting made my stomach churn. Here were my own children, people I'd helped countless times over the years, with car loans, house down payments, college tuition, planning to dispose of me like an inconvenient piece of furniture. The discussion continued, with my son adding, "We can tell him it's for his own safety, that we're worried about him living alone." The others murmured their agreement, as if they were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. I quietly shut the door and walked another lap around the block, my mind reeling. The cool evening air did nothing to calm the storm of emotions inside me: betrayal, anger, heartbreak, all competing for dominance. By the time I returned, they dispersed throughout the house, probably assuming their secret was safe. I managed to maintain my composure, thanking everyone for coming and seeing them out as if nothing had happened. That night was one of the longest of my life. Sleep evaded me as I replayed their words over and over in my head, trying to understand how the people I'd loved and supported could turn so mercenary. By morning, though, my shock had hardened into resolve. I might be aging, but I wasn't going to take this betrayal lying down. My first call was to my attorney, a man who'd helped me sell my grocery store and whom I'd grown to trust over the years. I explained the situation, and he immediately understood the gravity of it. We scheduled an appointment for the following week to update my will and set up additional protections. In the meantime, I had to maintain appearances. My son called twice, sounding cheerful and concerned, as if he hadn't just plotted to strip me of my independence. My daughter stopped by with groceries, insisting she wanted to make sure I was eating properly. I forced myself to smile and thank her, all while knowing her real motivation was to assess how soon she could move me out. A few days before my lawyer appointment, my brother invited me to lunch. The invitation felt calculated, but I accepted, curious to see what he'd reveal. Over burgers at a local diner, he played the role of the concerned sibling perfectly. "It must be tough living alone," he probed, watching my reactions carefully. You sure you're handling everything okay? I played along, nodding and making noncommittal responses. He pressed harder, suggesting that supervised care might be beneficial. I noticed how he avoided the phrase nursing home, as if softer language would make his true intentions less obvious. That same afternoon, my daughter arrived unannounced with a stack of brochures for assisted living facilities. I decided to play up my symptoms, acting more forgetful and anxious than usual, mentioning problems with sleep. She seized on this, presenting the facilities as perfect solutions, assuring me they'd handle all the financial stuff. When I asked why there was such a rush, her carefully worded response about avoiding a crisis situation barely masked her real concern, securing my assets before I could protect them. Finally, the day of my lawyer appointment arrived. I drove myself there, something I rarely do anymore, feeling it was important to demonstrate my independence. In his office, I laid out everything I'd overheard and my concerns about my family's intentions. He listened carefully, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief, before presenting me with several options. We started by revising my will to significantly reduce the inheritances of those who'd plotted against me. Then we created a new power of attorney arrangement, designating a neutral third party to oversee any medical decisions if I became incapacitated. Finally, we established a living trust that clearly stated my intention to remain in my home as long as medically feasible, with the stipulation that only a certified physician could deem me incapable of self-care. With these protections in place, I called a family meeting for the weekend. I kept the invitation vague, simply saying I wanted to discuss future plans. They arrived looking wary, my daughter glancing around as if expecting an ambush, my son wearing a forced smile, my brother slinking in last with barely a greeting. Once everyone was seated in my living room, I stood by the fireplace, my updated documents placed carefully on the coffee table. I began calmly, explaining that I'd been reviewing my will and healthcare directives. The moment I mentioned taking extra precautions, I saw my eldest son's face tighten. "Why now?" he demanded. "Did something happen?" I met his gaze steadily. "Yes, something did happen. I overheard some conversations." The room went dead silent. My daughter started fidgeting with her sleeve, while my brother's eyes darted everywhere except toward me. I continued, explaining that I'd heard their discussions about forcing me into a nursing home and securing their inheritances. I laid out the legal steps I'd taken to protect myself, watching their faces as the implications sank in. My brother tried to spin it as concern for my welfare, but his trembling voice betrayed him. My daughter attempted to look hurt, insisting they'd never want to harm me. My son took a more aggressive approach, demanding to know who had told lies about them. That's when I revealed I'd heard their kitchen conversation myself. The color drained from my daughter's face. My brother suddenly found the carpet fascinating. I took a deep breath and delivered the final blow. "I've changed my will. The distribution of my estate will now reflect each person's genuine care and respect for me, not their sense of entitlement." My son stood up, fists clenched but silent. My daughter stammered excuses. My brother sank deeper into the couch, muttering about misunderstandings. Then my mother, who had been sitting quietly throughout this confrontation, spoke up. She expressed her shock at the idea of forcing me into a home while I was still capable of independent living. Her words seemed to break something in the room. Suddenly, there was no way for them to pretend innocence. One by one, they tried to backtrack, claiming they'd never intended to act against my wishes. I ended the meeting by stating simply that if they truly cared about me, they needed to show it through actions, not words or brochures. I reminded them that I now had legal protections in place, then dismissed them to file out of my home in stunned silence. The aftermath was predictable. My son started showing up with expensive gift baskets and offers to help around the house, transparent attempts to curry favor that I politely but firmly rejected. My daughter called daily, pleading for forgiveness and claiming she'd only participated in the discussion out of concern. When I pressed her about the inheritance talk, she finally admitted to financial troubles, hoping my estate might provide a solution. I told her to fix her own finances without counting on an early inheritance. My brother tried a different approach, hosting a family barbecue where he promised no one would mention healthcare or finances. I attended, and true to his word, the conversation stayed light for most of the afternoon. But by the end of the day, he pulled me aside to suggest I reconsider the will changes, saying, "After all, we're family." I simply replied that family doesn't conspire behind someone's back to take their money. Weeks passed and guilt seemed to weigh on them. They organized what amounted to an intervention, urging me to forgive and forget. But their apologies still carried an undertone of self-interest, focused more on regaining their inheritance than rebuilding trust. What they failed to understand was that while I might eventually forgive them personally, I would never remove my legal protections. Some lines, once crossed, change things forever. The final legal documents ensured that as long as I remained mentally competent, no one could override my wishes. My revised will now favored a distant cousin who'd always shown genuine care for me, with the bulk of my estate designated for various charities. My immediate family would receive smaller shares, contingent on meeting certain behavioral guidelines, all perfectly legal under state law. When word of these changes spread, my children and brother erupted in anger again, claiming I was punishing them unfairly. One left a voicemail insisting that blood deserves more than some random charity. But their sense of entitlement only confirmed I'd made the right decision. My revenge, if you could call it that, was simply securing my autonomy and ensuring they couldn't profit from discarding me. Over time, the tension has begun to ease. They've started reaching out more carefully, focusing on my actual well-being rather than my assets. Whether this represents genuine change or mere acceptance of reality, I'm not entirely sure. But at least I can live in peace, knowing I won't be tossed aside before my time. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from the people closest to us. I've learned that betrayal can appear where you least expect it, but it's never too late to stand your ground and secure your future on your own terms. My story isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about protecting yourself and ensuring that those who truly care are the ones who benefit from your legacy.